The invitation had been a mistake. It had to be. I'd found the cream-colored envelope wedged between advertisements for plasma torch sales and a notice about overdue utility payments. My name, Marin Cross, written in actual ink, the kind nobody used anymore except for official documents or pretentious restaurant menus. Inside, embossed lettering announced my presence was requested at the centennial celebration of the founding treaty, at the Royal Palace, tonight. I'd assumed it was junk mail with exceptional production values, maybe a marketing scheme. But my landlord had seen it and practically shoved me out the door, insisting this was the opportunity of a lifetime and lending me her daughter's formal dress. A deep burgundy thing that fit well enough if I didn't breathe too deeply. Now I stood in the grand hall of the celestial palace, drowning in a sea of nobility I had no business swimming with. The space was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers the size of small spacecraft hung from vaulted ceilings, painted with scenes from the Great Unification. Nobles in jewel-toned silks and ceremonial military dress clustered in groups, their laughter musical and practiced. Servers glided between them carrying trays of delicacies I couldn't name and drinks that sparkled with what might have been actual gold flakes. I was a freight coordinator. I spent my days optimizing cargo routes through the inner systems and arguing with shipping companies about delivery schedules. My idea of formal wear was clean pants and a shirt without coffee stains. I definitely didn't belong here. The smart thing would be to find the darkest corner, sit quietly through whatever ceremony was planned, and leave the moment protocol allowed. Treat it like a very fancy mistake and hope nobody noticed me long enough to realize I shouldn't be here. I scanned the hall for empty seating. The main floor was arranged with dozens of round tables, each surrounded by ornate chairs. Most were already occupied by clusters of nobles who looked like they'd been born knowing which fork to use. Toward the back, partially hidden behind a decorative column, I spotted a table with several empty chairs. Perfect. I started making my way along the wall, trying to look purposeful rather than lost. A few people glanced my way, their expressions sliding from curiosity to dismissal when they didn't recognize me. That was fine. Anonymity was exactly what I needed. I was 3 steps from my goal when a ripple of silence spread through the hall like water freezing in fast forward. Everyone turned toward the main dais. Queen Celestia had arrived. I'd seen her in newscasts, of course. Everyone in the 5 systems had. But broadcasts didn't capture the presence she radiated as she descended the shallow steps from the royal entrance. She wore white, stark and simple against the riot of colors around her, with her legendary copper hair swept back in an intricate style that probably required 3 people and 2 hours to achieve. The crown of stellar unity rested on her head, its diamonds catching light and throwing rainbows across the marble floor. She was beautiful in that untouchable way of people born to power, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of Earth's oceans. A color I'd only seen in archive footage since Earth itself was 7 generations behind us. The Queen moved through the crowd with practiced grace, pausing to greet various nobles and dignitaries. I should have used the distraction to slip into my corner seat unnoticed. Instead, I froze like an idiot watching her. And then her eyes met mine. It was like being struck by lightning. Not painful exactly, but shocking enough that I forgot how to breathe. The Queen stopped mid-conversation with a man wearing enough medals to qualify as armor plating. Her expression shifted, surprise, recognition, something I couldn't name. She was looking at me, directly at me. No, she couldn't be. I was probably standing in front of someone important, blocking her view of an actual guest. I started to move aside to make myself invisible again. Queen Celestia began walking toward me. The silence that had fallen when she entered deepened into something almost physical. Hundreds of eyes tracked her movement across the polished floor. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers stopped moving. She was definitely walking toward me. There was no one else in this direction, nothing but me and the decorative column and my desperate wish to disappear into the marble. The Queen stopped 3 feet away. This close, I could see that her eyes weren't just ocean blue. They held flecks of silver that seemed to shift like stars. She studied my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You came," she said softly, not a question, a statement. I received an invitation." My voice came out steady despite my heart trying to hammer its way through my ribs. "Your Majesty." I added the title belatedly and attempted something that might have been a curtsy but probably looked more like a stumble. A small smile touched her lips. Then she did something that sent another wave of shocked whispers through the crowd. She extended her hand to me, not for a handshake, not in the formal greeting I'd seen her give the decorated officer moments ago. She held her hand out the way you would to someone you wanted to guide, to protect, to keep close. I stared at it, my mind completely blank. "Next to me," Queen Celestia said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty. The world seemed to tilt sideways. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Queens didn't, people like me didn't. But her hand remained extended, steady and sure. Waiting. On autopilot, operating on some instinct I didn't know I possessed, I placed my hand in hers. Her fingers were warm, her grip firm. She turned, keeping hold of my hand, and began walking toward the main dais where the royal table sat on an elevated platform overlooking the hall. I had no choice but to follow, stumbling slightly in borrowed shoes that were half a size too small. The crowd parted before us like a sea splitting. I caught flashes of faces, shock, confusion, barely concealed outrage, and cold calculation. A woman in emerald silk with the insignia of the Treasury Department looked like she'd swallowed something poisonous. A military commander with silver threading his dark hair tracked our movement with the focused attention of a predator watching prey. We climbed the 3 steps to the royal platform. The table there could seat perhaps a dozen people, and several chairs were already occupied by what I assumed were the Queen's closest advisors and family members. A young man who had to be Prince Matthias, the Queen's cousin and heir, sat rigidly in formal military dress, his expression carefully neutral. The seat directly to the Queen's right, the position of highest honor, stood empty. She guided me to it. "Please," she said, releasing my hand only so I could sit. I sank into the chair, my legs threatening to give out. The Queen settled gracefully beside me, and the hall slowly, hesitantly came back to life. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. People began moving to their own tables, but the energy had changed completely. Everyone was watching us with varying degrees of fascination and hostility. "You're probably confused," the Queen said quietly, leaning slightly toward me so her words wouldn't carry beyond our immediate space. "That's an understatement, Your Majesty." I gripped the edge of the table to keep my hands from shaking. Look at me. It wasn't a command exactly, but I obeyed anyway. This close, I could see fine lines at the corners of her eyes, evidence that she smiled more than her public persona suggested. But she wasn't smiling now. She looked almost fragile, which seemed impossible for someone who ruled 5-star systems. "You look exactly like her," she whispered. "Exactly like my sister." My breath caught. I don't understand. 20 years ago, my younger sister Alara disappeared. She was 17, brilliant, and she believed the monarchy was corrupt. We argued. She said terrible things. I said worse. The queen's jaw tightened. She left the palace in the middle of the night. We found her transport crashed in the outer rim 3 months later. No survivors, no bodies, just wreckage. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, because what else could I say? The official story was an accident, navigation failure. The queen's fingers traced the stem of her crystal water glass. But my intelligence officers never believed it. They thought she was murdered. Political enemies who wanted to hurt me by taking someone I loved. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because seeing you tonight was like seeing her ghost." The queen's eyes locked onto mine. "You have her face, her hair color, even the way you move. There's something in your posture, your gestures. It's uncanny." "People can look alike," I said carefully, "especially across populations as large as—" "I know," she cut me off gently. "I know it's probably coincidence, genetic probability across billions of people, but there's something else." She reached into a hidden pocket of her dress and withdrew a small data chip. Under the table, away from watching eyes, she pressed it into my palm. 3 weeks ago, my intelligence network intercepted communications about something called Project Echo. The details were encrypted, but they mentioned someone matching my sister's description being held in a black site facility in the outer colonies for the past 15 years. The Queen's voice remained steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "They said she had a daughter born in captivity." The chip felt like it was burning my skin. "You think I think I sent out hundreds of invitations to this event, most to nobility and dignitaries, but I also sent invitations to every woman in our databases between the ages of 18 and 25 who matched certain physical parameters." She paused. "You were one of 12 who actually attended. This is insane." I kept my voice low, but emotion leaked through. "I know who my parents are. I grew up in the merchant district on Station Calvera. My mother was a teacher. My father worked in hydroponics. They died in the plague outbreak 8 years ago." "I know. I've already reviewed your records." The Queen caught my expression. "I'm sorry, I had to, but here's what troubles me. Your birth registration has irregularities. Nothing obvious, but the biometric data doesn't quite match the genetic markers on file. As if someone created a very good false identity but didn't quite get every detail right." My mind reeled. "Even if, and I'm not saying you're right, but even if I was somehow your sister's child, why would you announce it like this, in front of everyone? You just painted a target on my back." "Yes." The Queen's expression hardened. "I did, because whoever took my sister, whoever might be holding her or know what happened to her, they're here tonight." I glanced around the hall with new eyes. Suddenly every noble, every military officer, every advisor looked potentially dangerous. "You're using me as bait." "I'm using the possibility of you as bait," she corrected. "I don't know who you are, Marin Cross. You might be my niece. You might be a remarkable coincidence. You might even be a plant, someone placed in my path deliberately to distract or deceive me." She met my eyes steadily. But I do know this. By elevating you publicly, by showing interest in you, I force whoever's behind Project Echo to react. They'll either try to eliminate you, recruit you, or reveal themselves trying to understand what I know. And what happens to me while you're waiting for them to make their move? You stay close to me, under my protection, in the palace where I can keep you safe. The Queen laid her hand over mine briefly. I won't lie to you, there's risk. But there's also the possibility of finding answers. About your true origins. About what happened to my sister. About who's been operating in the shadows of my government. A servant approached with the first course, forcing us to pause our conversation. As plates of something delicate and artistic were placed before us, I noticed the prince watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Further down the table, an older woman in military dress, General Haverson, I recognized her from news broadcasts, studied me with open hostility. The Queen made small talk with the dignitary on her left, but I could feel her attention on me even when she wasn't looking directly at me. I picked up my fork, trying to remember which utensil was for what. Around the hall, the celebration continued, but underneath the music and laughter, I could sense tension like electricity before a storm. A man in dark formal wear approached our table, bowing low. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. Lord Chancellor Vex requests a private audience regarding the treaty amendments." "Later," the Queen said without looking at him. "I'm otherwise engaged." The man's eyes flickered to me, cold and calculating. "Of course, Your Majesty." Though he did emphasize the urgency, later. This time her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. The man retreated, but I'd seen his face. I'd remember it. "Lord Chancellor Vex controls much of the military procurement," the Queen murmured. "He's also one of 3 people who had the authority to authorize classified detention facilities in the outer colonies 20 years ago. You suspect him." "I suspect everyone." She took a delicate sip of wine. "That's why I need you visible, need you close. You're forcing them to show their hands. What if showing their hands means killing me? Then I'll know who to execute for treason." She said it so matter-of-factly that it took a moment to register the steel beneath her words. "But I won't let it come to that. You're under my personal protection now. That means something." Across the hall, I saw a woman in deep purple whispering urgently to a military officer. They both glanced toward our table, their expressions troubled. The prince leaned forward slightly. "Aunt Celestia, perhaps we should discuss." "Not now, Matthias." The Queen's tone brooked no argument. He sat back, jaw tight, but said nothing more. The evening stretched on, course after course of food I couldn't taste. The Queen kept me beside her through speeches and toasts, through performances by musicians who probably commanded fees larger than my annual salary. She introduced me to various nobles as my honored guest, giving no explanation but making my importance clear through proximity alone. Each introduction brought barely concealed shock, speculation, and in some cases, thinly veiled threat. And through it all, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, assessing, calculating, wondering who I was, and what it meant that the Queen had chosen me. By the time the formal portion of the evening ended and people began to mingle more freely, I was exhausted from the tension alone. "Come," the Queen said, rising gracefully. "Let me show you something." She led me through a side door, away from the crowd, into a quiet corridor where only 2 guards stood watch. They fell into step behind us as we walked through passages decorated with artwork that probably belonged in museums. We stopped before a portrait I'd never seen in any archive or broadcast. A young woman with copper hair and ocean eyes smiled out from the canvas, captured mid-laugh. She wore simple clothes, trousers, and a work shirt, and stood in what looked like a garden rather than a throne room. "Ilara," the queen said softly. "2 months before she disappeared, she hated formal portraits, so I commissioned this one in secret. The artist caught her in the greenhouse where she spent most of her time studying xenobotany. I studied the painting, searching for resemblance beyond general coloring. The bone structure was similar, I supposed, the shape of the eyes, but couldn't that be coincidence? I loved her more than anyone," Queen Celestia continued. "And I failed her. I was so focused on my duties, on being the perfect heir, that I didn't see how trapped she felt, how much she needed to be seen as more than just the spare." She turned to me. "If there's even a chance she's alive, if there's a chance she had a child who survived, I need to know, can you understand that?" I looked into her eyes and saw grief that 20 years hadn't healed. Whatever else was happening, political machinations, conspiracies, my own uncertain origins, her pain was real. "Yes," I said quietly, "I understand." She squeezed my hand briefly. "Good, because tomorrow you move into the palace. We'll begin investigating properly. Your background, the Project Echo communications, everything. Tonight was about forcing a reaction. Now we watch to see who moves and how. And if I really am just a freight coordinator who happens to look like your sister, then you'll have the strangest story to tell your grandchildren." A hint of dark humor touched her expression. "And you'll still have helped me unmask traitors, which I'll be appropriately grateful for." We returned to the hall, where the celebration had evolved into smaller groups engaged in intense conversation. I caught fragments as we passed, speculation about my identity, theories about the Queen's intentions, whispered warnings about political upheaval. The woman in emerald silk from earlier stepped directly into our path. "Your Majesty, might I request an introduction to your guest?" The Queen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Minister Thale, of course, this is Marin Cross. Marin, Minister Thale, oversees our treasury and economic policy." "A pleasure," the minister said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I don't believe I've seen you at court before, Miss Cross." "I don't usually move in these circles," I admitted. "No, I wouldn't imagine so." Her gaze swept over me, cataloging and dismissing. "The Queen must have seen something special in you to grant such honor." "The Queen sees many things others overlook," Queen Celestia interjected smoothly. "That's why she's queen." The minister's smile tightened. "Indeed, though I hope this interest doesn't distract from more pressing matters. The trade negotiations with the outer colonies are at a delicate stage. I'm capable of managing multiple priorities, Minister." The Queen's voice carried a warning. "As I've demonstrated for 23 years. The tension between them was palpable. After a moment, Minister Thale bowed stiffly and withdrew. "She's worried," the Queen murmured as we continued walking. "She should be." Her department had oversight of the facility where Project Echo supposedly operated. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I didn't like. How many people in this room might be involved? That's what we're going to find out. Queen Celestia guided me toward the exit. "Starting tonight, you held my hand and accepted my invitation to sit beside me. You can't go back to your old life now. The only path forward is through." As we left the grand hall, I glanced back at the glittering assembly. Somewhere in that crowd of nobles and officers, someone knew the truth about what had happened 20 years ago. Someone knew if I was really who the Queen hoped I was, or if I was just a convenient resemblance she could use as a weapon. Either way, I'd become a piece on a board I didn't understand, playing a game I'd never agreed to. The Queen had chosen me. Whether that would save me or destroy me remained to be seen.